Are you feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and disenchanted by life, the universe, and everything? Maybe you're frustrated with the talking heads who say one thing and do something completely different. Yeah, me too. Welcome to People Watching, a podcast where we figure out what it looks like to become the role model we've always wanted by talking with real people who found real role models in their own lives. Together, we cut through all the noise and identify better sources of hope, creativity, and wisdom as we explore how we learn to make decisions about the kind of life we want to live. So join us. Let's do some people watching. This is your host, Megan J. Robinson. I first met Cayce almost 20 years ago when she started attending a writers group that I helped to start. One of the things I've always admired about Cayce is her passion for social justice and community organizing, especially in the face of dealing with chronic illness. We explore Cayce's journey through non-denominational evangelicalism and her return to the Methodist Church, and how her faith shapes her activism in her local community. Cayce shared how she's worked through the sense of always feeling like an unwelcome prophet in the faith and political communities of which she's been a part. We also talked about discovering the constellation of witnesses and teachers across history, a community of ancestors who are still with us today as co-creators and guides in the work we do in the world. Talking with Cayce is always challenging and exhilarating. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome to part 1 of our conversation. And now we're in the studio.
It's
Awesome.
fancy in here.
I know. Well, welcome to People Watching, Cayce. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm happy to be here with you.
I'm happy to be here with you too. So one of the things I like to do with each guest is to start off by reading and sharing Touchstones, kind of pop-up rules that help shape our expectations for how we're going to show up for each other in this conversation. And so I will start with the first one. And Cayce, just know that whatever we share here tonight is by invitation, not obligation. And if either of us is not comfortable with pursuing a topic, feel free to just say, I prefer not to share. Thank you.
Okay. Also, silence is a partner in our conversation. So feel free to take a moment to reflect without immediately filling the space with words. Leave room for the inner teacher to whisper as well.
Awesome. And as we're here, let's just try to be present as fully as possible. And I want this and hope for this to be a space where we acknowledge our doubts, our fears, and our feelings as much as it is a space to share our joys, convictions, and successes.
And we will ask open, honest questions. If we're not sure what the other meant in the question or statement, we're going to ask. It gives us a chance to clarify or rephrase and ask questions that we genuinely don't know the answer to. Surprise is a great catalyst for insight.
Hear, hear. I love it. Awesome. Well, Cayce, you and I have known each other for 20 some years now. Almost that long. And but I am so excited because I feel like I'm just going to hear aspects and dimensions to your life and your story and who you are that I hadn't known before. So one of the things I would love to just start off with is share a little bit of your life story. Like, what are the things that stand out to you as you look back as meaningful and that brought you to who you are today, now?
So just a small, quick question.
Yeah,
It's really
nothing,
easy.
nothing, nothing,
Start.
nothing difficult.
Yeah, so I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I grew up most of my childhood there. Um, Small stints in other places, but pretty much there. Um, Went to college in Charlotte, and so the first 20 some years of life was very much located in one place for the most part. Um, when I got married really young, so I got married right out of college,
Mm.
and we're still married now. And it's been almost 25 years this May. So, yeah, time is a vapor. Um,
Time is a circle of life.
I'm telling you, I'm trying to think of like big touch points. I went into teaching, after college and I really loved it. I loved working with teenagers and, um, watching people figure things out and have those aha moments. I love that kind of work. Um, but I also felt called to do a little bit more. And so I went back to school and we ended up moving to DC or the DC area. And we moved here so that I could start working on public policy and things related to government. And I found myself kind of wandering around different fields of activism, um, until I finally landed in, a place where I was working consistently for racial justice in particular, with that particular lens toward policy. And I guess the moment that kind of brought me into that, well, there were a few different moments. Um, there was a speaker at a church that was talking about, um, finding that point where you've had all you can stand and you can't stand anymore. You have to do something to solve this problem or this issue or address it. And I had a teacher in grad school that said that the point where your experience meets your passions, that's really kind of your sweet spot in terms of like your vocation or what you should be doing with your life. And so I found in that time period, post grad school, pre becoming like a mom, that I was getting more and more, um, I wouldn't even say necessarily signs, but just more and more nudges in the direction of focusing on anti-racism. And so I was going in that direction, had always been fascinated with that my whole life. Um, didn't really think of it as something that, you know, I would necessarily be working on. But yeah, so in 2015, well, I won't even say 2015. So right before 2015, we had already started having a family. We had children. We had 3 children, and I uh, was on Twitter a lot with other friends who were working on writing. And I mean, you remember when Twitter was like a legit place to hang out. Um, and I was working with other people who were interested in writing. We were doing some blogging, that kind of thing. And um, news came out that Michael Brown had been murdered in Ferguson, Missouri. And, and that really kind of just broke it wide open for me. The year before, Trayvon Martin had been killed, and I was experiencing a lot of friction with people in my faith community about that. Um, and it was kind of just burning inside, like, why don't people care about what is happening here. And then, so when Mike Brown was killed and the community responded, and then the government responded in the terribly violent way they did to the community's legitimate frustration and grief, I ended up just glued to Twitter, like just really glued to Twitter. And some of the people that I had been talking about racial justice with, some of the people I'd been writing with, we kind of created a little cohort of sorts where we could kind of process what was happening, watching it from afar as white or white identified people. And that was really a big turning point for me because I was looking for a political home. I didn't feel like the two-party system was for me. I didn't really feel like it really fit my value system. I was looking for something to do. It was all kind of those things coming together. And so that's when it was around then that I found out about Showing Up for Racial Justice. And that's the organization that I still organize with to this day. So I've been with Surge for about 10 years now, and it's really changed everything for me with
Mm.
the kids, with my faith community, with um, my immediate community. It's changed the folks that I run with on a daily basis. Um, yeah, it's been really transformative. So I would say those are some of the touch points in terms of my trajectory and like my
Mhm.
vocation and the kind of bent of um,
Mhm.
my work and efforts and writing and different things like that have all kind of come from
Mhm.
that place.
Mhm. I mean, I remember when we first met, because you had started coming to the writers group that
Mm-hmm.
I had helped found at a church in Northern Virginia, which, by the way, I now live 5 minutes from where you grew up, and you
Yeah.
live about 15 minutes from where I grew up in Northern Virginia.
Yeah. Wild, isn't it?
Weird, weird. Um, but you had started coming to the writers group, so that was how you and I
Mm-hmm.
met. And I don't know if it was that same event that you just mentioned, a speaker at church just kind of breaking it open for you, or if it was another event.
Yeah.
I think you and our friend Ashley and I had gone to something. And I just remember you expressing a lot of frustration about where to direct your passion because you've
Yeah.
always been working in advocacy of some sort. I know you were
Mm-hmm.
working at a pro life, I forget the name of the organization. It was pro life, Democrat, liberal intersection.
So when we met, I was doing that and I was trying to work on um the question of abortion less from a legal versus illegal standpoint and more from a what are we doing to support women and women's health and
Mm.
women who are in situations where they might be considering other options like adoption or um, that kind of thing. So it was coming at that question from a place of where are systems failing women? And
Sure.
that was kind of how I was coming into that conversation. And I got with that increasingly frustrated in that community because at the end of the day, most of those folks only cared about the legal question. They didn't care about disparities. They didn't care the 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 questions around um, gender discrimination and things like that really were kind of it's a bad metaphor, but like frosting on the cupcake for those folks.
Sure, sure,
And for me, that was the central point. So
sure.
um, I came to a point where, with a couple different organizations, I had pretty significant just mission creep concerns and worry that um, electoral politics was getting too involved, that everybody was focusing on the wrong things, and that ultimately that was only going to lead to more harm for women. So I ended up leaving both of those places and getting
Mm,
very frustrated with that whole scene. I think I had tried for a long time to reconcile my feminism with um, a sense that these two issues, that women's reproductive choices were always intertwined with systemic pressures, right? Or
sure.
lack of resources. And sometimes just straight up isms, racism, capitalism, ableism, all of that. And so it it got to the point where I just couldn't work within the confines of that
Mm,
anti-abortion framework, because that's really all it was an anti-abortion framework.
gotcha. Sure.
Um, and so when I moved out of that, I was very much in a place of still frustrated, trying to reconcile my um, presence in an evangelical community with um, my concern for systemic and institutional injustice. It just was not coming together, and
Sure.
um, I couldn't find a lot of support, because a lot of the at the end of the day, it always came down to that one question of legalized abortion, and no matter what the issue was. And it was very frustrating. So I ended up looking for other outlets. And that's when I met y'all, as I was moving from that place more into well, maybe I should do some blogging. And there had been a really vibrant response to um, in those intervening years to the lack of women's voices in the publishing industry. And there was a lot of organizing going on Twitter, on blogs, and different places for women to start coming together and getting more writing, more visibility in writing, more publishing. Um, it was it was kind of this wave of people writing. And a lot of the people that I met through that are published authors now. I mean, many of them very invested in writing. I was looking at writing. Writing didn't hold for me quite the same thing that it did for other people. It seemed like other people couldn't help but write, and they would write no matter what. That wasn't really me. And I don't know if that was because, for me, accessibility is a factor, because I do have rheumatoid arthritis, a long chronic illness. Physically, writing is frustrating. I don't really like dictation. I'll use it if I have to, but then you have to go back and edit so much, it might as well be writing. Um, but for me, the writing was more of a means to an end. It was like a way to communicate a message. And so I can write and do that kind of communication through all kinds of different means. Um, but to me, I think what was at the heart was like a sense of ministry. Like there is this and there are these injustices in the world, and I do want to speak to them, and I do want to do something about it. And Enneagram 8 in me is like jumping, you know, racing ahead. And I didn't know where to put it. That was a very good
Mm,
description. Like I just didn't know where to put that energy. And so when I found a place that I could build alongside people who were very, very different from me in terms of backgrounds and experiences and living situations, very, very different from me, but um, very much aligned in identifying the problem and commitment to walking in solidarity with other people to build the kind of future we want. And so for me, that was really important. And I found that external to my faith community, um, which was hard for a bit. It was hard for a bit because, yeah, it forced me to question some stuff about all of
Mm-hmm.
that and like where that fit um, in my life. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
What has been your faith journey? Because I know when we met, it was at a non-denominational evangelical
Mhm.
church. And did you grow up in a faith community and Christian community? Like, what did that look like
Mm.
for you?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I remember being invited to my friend Amy's youth group at a Methodist church when I was in middle school.
Okay.
And she seemed so nice, and the youth group seemed so nice that I actually enjoyed going to it. And it was a
Hmm.
small youth group. It wasn't flashy. It was, what you would imagine, everybody sitting in a circle reading a thing and talking about it. And it was really nice, and I really liked it. I found that it was that the folks there were open to my lack of knowledge and my questions, and that was really important to me. So I participated for on and off in kind of a casual way for a few years with this small Methodist youth group, and I ended up, let me think, in high school, my grandmother died, and my grandmother had been part of faith communities her whole life. And her husband, my grandfather, who I didn't know very well because he died when I was really young, um, was kind of held up in the family as this real man of faith, guy who walked the talk, loved to serve people. You would meet, like, I met a person when I started teaching who knew him, and he was bringing meals to people even while he was dying of cancer. So just a real salt of the earth kind of person. And he, so when my grandmother died, I was like a little beside myself because I didn't know what to make of that. I wanted to know more about what she believed was going to happen once she died. I wanted to understand what were the requirements? Are there rules for getting in or out of things? I mean, like everything I knew was from TV and whatnot. My parents had both been raised in faith communities, and both of them kind of made an active choice to not push us into that. Um, but in leaving that door wide open, there were still a lot of questions. I didn't
Hmm.
have any structure. My mom gave me a Bible and encouraged me to read it, but I didn't know where to start. I mean, I didn't know. And being in the South, it was just a culture that it was kind of out
Yeah.
there. People kind of knew about it. And every now and then there was this, I still remember there was this furniture commercial um, for a furniture dealership in Waxhaw that was family owned. And some of the time it was goofy commercials, and then other times it was just a copy of like a page out of the King James Bible with like illuminated script, and it was read out loud. And then that was the end of the commercial. You know what I mean? So it's like stuff like that was just kind of in the environment, and it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like, okay, um that whole the whole
Nice.
John 3:6 yeah, the whole John 3:16 at a football game kind of vibe, you know what I mean? Um, but you don't know anything, you still don't know anything. And I would read the Bible and it would seem super confusing. So I was just like, I don't know what to do with that. But my little Methodist youth group was very nice about it. And at the end of the day, they were it was an older church. There were teens involved, but it was small. So it was very multi-generational. It gave me that kind of vibe of like, I liked the liturgy of the service. That to me was very instructive. Like the stained glass was very instructive. The fact that everybody would read the Apostles' Creed or the Lord's Prayer together would be in the program. It made me feel less intimidated, like I didn't know anything. All these people
Mm.
knew how to do it, but we'd all open our program at the same time. And you know what I mean? It was that kind of thing. And singing from hymnals and stuff, that all felt very like everybody in here is on literally on the same page. So, um, so I really liked that. And so by the time I became, let's see, I was a senior, I believe. Um, in high school, I decided to get baptized. And so that they baptized me at that little church and I officially joined. And so I was a Methodist there for a minute. And that's how I came to understand who Jesus was. That's how I came to understand
Mm.
what a community was like. And it was really nice because I feel like when I met my husband in college, he was Southern Baptist. So they're very big on when did you get saved and how old were you and what was the date and all of this kind of stuff. And I didn't have any of that, right? So I was like, well, I didn't have that. It wasn't like I had a come to Jesus moment. It's like I just gradually got to know Jesus and thought he was
Mm.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so it was a whole different way to come to it. And so then when we got married, his pastor from back home actually moved to Charlotte, and so we were able to go to his home pastor's church, which meant we moved straight into Southern Baptist land. And the first thing that I occurred there as a disruptive element was that the immersion baptism was a requirement for membership. And I was like,
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I am not redoing that. I did it the right way. I did it with my people. I could have gotten dunked. They offered to dunk me, but that would have meant I couldn't do it in the church. We'd have had to go somewhere else. And I wasn't having that. So I wanted my people to be there. I thought that was important. So I told the pastor that and that I had been baptized for the most part, adult, um, at 17 and that I had been involved for a long time and understood what was going on and all of that. And he's, we don't have to, you know. So he let me join.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, that's good. 'Cause gonna, I wasn't going to get rebaptized. Like I just, that was important to me. So see, I was already at odds, right? Already at odds.
Yeah.
And we we would visit different churches in college, but that's where we landed when we got married. And that's the church we got married in. And then um, we stayed there because we made friends and we got connected and all of that. I started teaching in a Christian school, which another point of friction. I could tell you stories on stories on stories of what. Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
because you tell somebody to teach world and American literature to
Yeah.
teenagers in a very dogmatic, restrictive environment, and it's going to cause some, you know.
Yeah.
So so anyway, so that like continued. I was just always kind of off. I learned
Mm.
all the lingo, but there was always something where I was kind of out of step. And then when we moved here, I was in a graduate program at a at an evangelical college, um, a little more charismatic and fundamentalist than I was used to. And I was studying government, right? So, that was super fun and interesting because my views were at odds with what we were being presented as or what was taken. taken for granted everybody would be on the same page about. I would come in with a different perspective and, get a lot of, mm, but that makes sense. Why do you also make sense? Kind of stuff. And so, yeah, so that was a good time. Um, so I just kind of have always been in that little path. And when we were at that evangelical church, which you mentioned earlier, at some point I had a pastor tell me, a younger junior pastor tell me that I was, um, that I was sitting in a prophetic position
Mm.
in terms of the feelings I had out of step with the community. And he was like, he didn't agree with me about everything, but he was like, "You're somebody who sees the whole field, and you're going to make mention of the things that nobody else wants to talk about, and it's going to be disruptive." And he even used the scripture that talks about where it talks about how Jesus fulfilled the scripture that says a prophet will not be welcome in his hometown. And I was like, well, that's encouraging, right? So I get to be the permanent church weirdo. Yay.
Not
Um,
just a phase. This is the journey.
it's a way of life. It's a way of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I just kind of accepted that for a long time in the evangelical church, that I was just always going to be the one that everybody was like, oh, she ain't right. And but when I got more committed to racial justice in particular, feminism in particular, um, I reached a couple of different breaking points within the evangelical church over issues around um, caring for trans and non-binary folks, um, including queer folks, in conversations and decisions that directly affected them. None of that was well received. And then when I started getting more vocal about anti-racism, that really kind of hit the button.
Mm.
Uh, the eject those things really kind of hit the eject button for me. So we left that church. We hung out in a different evangelical church for a couple years that to me I describe as more of like a palate cleanser. It was the kind of church that was going to have enough vagary around the edges to where you could kind of go and know that it wasn't going to hurt you, but it also wasn't going to really push you either. Um,
Yeah. I went to that
so,
church, I
mhm,
think, a few years before you did. And it
yes,
was the palate cleanser for me because I had been on staff with that big evangelical church that we went
yes,
to. And I was
yeah,
like, I need to separate Monday through Friday from Sunday.
yeah, yeah,
And that was the church that I ended up at. I loved
mhm,
it when it was this tiny little hole in the wall church. And
mhm,
then they built the big new building. I remember going
yeah,
one Sunday and they were leading into communion and they had turned the lights down and they were playing the dreamy bass line music. I
mhm,
believe there was a little bit of a smoke machine going and they had the
yeah.
lights all and stuff. And I remember sitting there going, you're trying to manipulate me into having an experience. Well, I'm not going to do it, damn it.
I know. Yeah, that happens a lot, right? And it's just, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could argue that any kind of liturgy is trying to give you an experience, is trying to hit
Yeah.
certain points, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, it to me that got really tiring because I was still in that place where I wanted somebody to say something or do something about these things. And a lot of the program elements in terms of like mission or the social justice stuff. It was all very symbolic or uh, a gesture. It wasn't really about examining the real problem. It was more about charity than solidarity. And that was
Mhm.
very frustrating as well, because I felt like, well, now you're just kind of making fun of what I care about. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, not intentionally, but, that's kind of the vibe. And so, yeah, we just were really conflicted. And right before the pandemic lockdown phase, because we're still in the pandemic, um, right before the lockdown phase started, we started going to a Methodist church that had a pretty good reputation for being um, inclusive, social justice minded. They were on what I considered the right side of the fight over, you know, the big fight that the Methodists were having over ordaining and gay clergy and marrying uh, gay families. So I felt um, I felt like that wasn't going to be an issue for me. Um, they spoke from the pulpit about white Christian nationalism, which nobody was. I didn't know many churches that were predominantly white that were saying that out loud
Mhm.
at the beginning of the Trump administration. So to me, I was like, okay, I could sit here and do this, and we can do this.
Mhm.
It was very much a cultural adjustment for my kids because they were used to the smoke machines
Yeah.
and the noise. And this place was very much more, um, I mean, we sang a lot of the same songs, but it was very much more, um, I don't know how to say it, like homespun in a way, because they had the sound and they had all the things, but not everybody would hit every single note, and sometimes the teleprompter wouldn't work right or something, and we had to and the director had to improvise everybody. There was a little bit of a um, handmade element to it that didn't feel so performative,
Sure.
and I liked that. And the kids didn't know what to
Mhm.
do with that at first. I think now there's an appreciation for it, even though they
Mhm.
still really like the smoke
Mhm.
machines. Um, but yeah, for me, it's taken me back to that the simplicity of the faith that I began to understand when I was a teenager,
Mhm.
the kind that has a lot more nuance to it, the kind that doesn't get into little boxing corners over whether or not predestination is where it's at, or you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't get into fights about all that. Like, instead says, "Oh, look at what these Christians are doing. Isn't that interesting? What can we learn from them? What can we learn from these guys?"
Mhm.
Um and sometimes it's frustrating because it it feels to me more centrist than I am. However, there is enough, for me at least, um risk and commitment in places, um on issues that are important to me and my family, that we've been able to stick it out. And I also think that a lot of the way that they look at a faith journey is very much more, I don't want to say converting because that's not the goal, but it is very much more converting than the other kind of stuff. I mean, it just is. It's more winsome, you
Yeah.
know, to be with people
Mhm.
who are all very humble about their position. It really is the opposite of um what I got in the evangelical world. The
Yeah.
evangelical world felt very competitive. It felt very much about being right and being smart and being um, morally, you know, uh, credentialed.
Sure.
And there's none of that over here in the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure there is somewhere, but
Sure.
in the one that we attend at least, and I feel the denomination overall, there's just not this posturing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it it's not for a lack of doctrine or dogma. The dogma and the doctrine's there. It's just not it's not enshrined and it's not weaponized in the same way.
Yeah.
And so
One of the
I feel a lot more at peace, and I don't feel like a weirdo for doing what
mm,
I do in the world. I feel supported in doing what I do in the world, even
mm,
by people who don't necessarily see it the way I see it. I feel like people still want me to do well, and they want um, the things I care about to matter more to the world. You know what I mean?
yeah. Mm, mm. One of the things I've noticed in my own faith journey, and also the part time, so some of the work that I do is looking at a lot of different resources from Protestant, Orthodox, and Catholic Christianity.
Mhm.
And a lot of that is looking at like literally service outlines for each of these
Oh,
streams. And one of the things I have noticed in all of this, once you get outside of the evangelical church service, because in the evangelical church, the sermon is the capstone. You know,
mhm,
a very well put together 3 point, at least, sermon that applies to the listener's daily life, that they can kind of walk out the door and, feel like they got something relevant.
mhm,
that lovely buzzword, relevant. Um, that is really the capstone of an evangelical service in
yeah,
many cases. Um, what I have noticed in my travels is once you get outside of that particular service structure, the homilies are usually much shorter, much less, perhaps less polished. I mean, shorter is difficult,
mhm,
but perhaps less polished, perhaps less concerned with landing on a specific point.
mhm,
And it's really part of a whole service of text reading, of singing,
mhm,
of reciting creeds. That it is part of a whole woven structure where the
mhm,
whole structure does a lot more work than
mhm,
just the sermon. And to me, it also seems to leave a lot more room for the third member of the Trinity
mhm.
to do the work that Christ promised
Yeah,
that the Spirit would do.
yeah,
And in my own journey, I have come to really appreciate that. And I've come to
mhm,
really appreciate communities that acknowledge that and play within that.
yeah,
And so I think that's something really special and really valuable to find when you can find a faith community that allows room for that diversity
mhm,
and that nuance,
yeah,
and allows you as an individual the space to have that journey instead of
yeah,
trying to say it will look this way and it will end in this spot,
yeah, yeah.
which
It's been very nice, and it's funny because I think the pandemic lockdown period taught me to and I'm still not good at this as a practice, but it taught me to um, be present and be more humble in that way. When we would go to churches um, in that evangelical phase, we were always looking for, um, there was all this talk about we want spiritual, we don't want the fluffy stuff. We want, da, 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 da. And I appreciate that. And I think one thing I got out of evangelical land is like just a real strong sense of literacy around the scriptures and the Bible. And so, yay, thanks for that. I'm taking that
Yeah.
with me. Um, but I also feel that one of the things that is kind of opening up for me in recent years, and maybe it's just because I've been reading uh, more theologian thinkers than just theologian, prescriptivist kind of writing.
Mhm.
Um,
Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 2 of this conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you found something that resonated with you and that helps you become more hopeful, creative, and wise in your own life. Please share this with someone who you think would love this conversation, and like, subscribe, and leave a comment or a review to boost the show. Shalom.